for it to determine kudos.
Yeah, I mean, the quickest way to figure out if someone's a jerk or not is just to ask them for a little bit of money, even if it's
Yeah,
$5.
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
is that like kind of what your new book is about? Um, Setting boundaries without feeling like a DICK.
It is. It is. It's about actually, it's about changing the conversation around boundaries, to be honest. A lot of us know we have to set boundaries. A lot of us shy away from it because we don't want to feel like DICKs. Don't want to feel like jerks. We want to feel like the good people we know ourselves to be. But then when we're nice, we feel taken advantage of. So how to find that balance, and we often think of boundaries as a way to keep like people out. I want people to start to see them as bridges to connection, as ways to connect with other people in a way that doesn't require us to put up walls where we feel separated, doesn't require us to give all of us where we feel taken advantage of, but is a conduit to actually know another human being and let yourself be known. That's, I think, the magic of what boundaries holds, and I think we all miss that. I think we got it wrong. So I'm hoping to change how we talk about boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries are super important. I mean, they could be small, and I mean, you said it. I was thinking it as you were saying it. Like even in like the business world, you could build a wall or build a bridge when someone has like an objection or they don't agree with something. And nowadays, it seems like no one really takes the time to understand why someone feels the way they do about a certain subject. Most recently, politics. I feel like people can't listen to anyone. It's like if you agree with me, you're against me. Versus just like you look at the world a little different, and that's cool.
Yeah, right. We all have different perspectives, and I think that it's important to a lot of times in saying that I'm unique and I know who I am and I'm different and this is what makes me different from you. That's wonderful. It allows me to embrace my uniqueness. But right now, we're all so focused on our own uniqueness that we're forgetting how to then bring that uniqueness to the rest of the world so that we can be a blending of all our uniqueness, not a fighting over whose uniqueness is the better uniqueness. And at this point, everything has become political. So it's all become conversations that no one is willing to have, and I teach how to use language as the bridge, because it's very nice to say I want to use a bridge, and people who are highly empathetic think that means like giving everything and sacrificing everything, and then that feels gross. We don't like that. It doesn't, it feels good, but until it doesn't. And so, how to use the words that we use as the mechanism by which we connect with others. It really comes down to linguistics. And I teach actual linguistic formulas in the book so that you don't have to think about it. The language does the work for you, it's what builds the bridge.
Yeah, language is super important. Just like changing one word can totally redefine the outcome of something. Like I was talking to a an author who's like a sports psychologist, and he's like, people just put too much pressure on themselves. So saying like I can do this, say I could do this. So like it's like almost giving, it's just like can versus could. Just like that little change in verbiage, just like, I can do this versus I could do this. Kind of just like brings the temperature in the room down a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. It's about using our words not to appease others, but to empower. And when we do that, we also stop appeasing ourselves. We start to empower ourselves. And it's little tiny language switches that does it. Turns out that the more we understand how our brain works, the more we realize that our words are not describing our reality; they create our reality. How we talk about ourselves, how we use the words in our head, how we talk with others creates our perspective, creates our experience of the world. And so if we want new perspectives, if we want new experiences, we don't have to change the world outside of us. We just have to change how we talk about it. And that does some really cool things in the brain.
Yeah, because I mean, if you let people just take advantage of you, because I mean, being kind, bless you,
Thank
being
you.
kind and being trusting are good qualities to have. However, there's so many people out there who do everything and never do anything for themselves. And that could be very detrimental to someone, especially if people know that this person's never going to say no when they ask them for something. They're just like, oh, I know Jen. She never says no when I ask for help, so I'm going to hit her up because I'm not going to get rejected. Versus some people say no to everything.
Right. And so when we say no to everything, we feel very safe. We know ourselves, but we don't know how to connect with others. And so there's some isolation in it. When we say yes to everything, it breeds selfishness in the other person precisely because they think, I won't get rejected. I don't have to worry about it. And so the more nice I am, I might be feeling like this is being helpful, but it's not really compassionate. Being nice and giving someone everything they want and breeding selfishness in them might be nice in the moment to moment, but over the relationship, it's not a compassionate thing to do. The compassionate thing to do is to build a bridge with this person, even when you disagree. Because in one of the things I teach in the later chapters is a negotiation model, how to use language to find common ground
Hmm.
so that it's not about my side versus your side and what I believe, but what you versus what you believe, but how to find this space where we can negotiate, where we can collaborate, and where we can come to ideas that either one of us couldn't come to on our own, but that together, that we're meant to elevate each other, not to battle over who's more unique or who's more right. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that in our society. And I think boundaries is the answer. I mean, again, highly biased, but boundaries are supposed to be how we manage the flow of energy between us and the world. It's
Mm.
not just about what I keep out, it's also about what I let in. Am I allowing in support and compliments and information? Am I showing curiosity for this other person? And oftentimes we don't. We just say, you can't talk to me that way. And then we walk off and we're like, I set a boundary. I'm like, I mean, you spoke up. You spoke up. It'll feel empowering, but is it effective? And it's proving to not be effective.
Yeah, I like to run a scenario by you.
Yes.
Maybe. So, uh, I was at a table, and there was four tables in this room, and I was the only person at the table. There was no one else sitting at any other tables. All the tables are the exact same table, same chairs, no difference. The only difference is where I was sitting was a little bit closer to a door. And I'm sitting there by myself, headphones on, working, minding my own business. And this lady comes up to me and goes, "Excuse me, uh, can you move? I have this table reserved." And I said, "Yeah, it's no problem. However, like, what's the difference between this table and that table?" And her argument was she has it reserved. So some people have told me that my mindset was wrong because she reserved the table. She has the right to that table. Versus I looked at it as like, what's wrong with that table?
Right.
And I kind of like called her out. I was like, well, so you want to inconvenience me just because you reserved this table, but there's not a table there?
Right.
I mean, what would you be your viewpoint on that sort of scenario?
So I love that you spoke up for what you wanted, which is kind of the heart of boundaries. And the language that you used created a scenario where this other person now was trying to prove why you were wrong. And now everyone's kind of weighing in on it. And there's this tug of war in you. What I would recommend is something called the boundaries blueprint. It's something I teach in the book.
Mhm.
It's 3 steps. Step one, it's multiple choice, nice and easy. You either say, I appreciate, I respect, I agree, or I love. One of those
Mhm.
four, you'll notice I understand is not on that list. When we say I understand, instinctively, out of the person's awareness, they'll be thinking, no, you don't. If you understood, you'd agree with me. So when we say understand, it kind of does something in the brain. So I appreciate, I agree, I respect, I love. Step two is you say and. That's it.
Mhm.
Just say and. Often we go astray by saying but, which is one of those little tiny words that has so much power. I talk all about that. And then step three is to share what you would love without making it a command for the other person. So for in that instance, you could have using that blueprint could have said, I appreciate that you reserved this table and I would love to stay here in my spot. Is it possible for another table to be used? Now, in that scenario, you'll notice I said, I would love to stay here. Could another table be used? The word you didn't appear anywhere in that part.
Mhm.
If I said, I would love you to find another table, or I would love you to do this, or asking, why can't you? I'm inviting now by saying, why can't you? I'm going on the offense to use sports analogy. Of course, they're going to take defense.
Mhm.
So now they got defensive and now they're going to prove back and forth. And so now we get into that. You know, my dad used to call it peeing contest with each other. And he's like, don't get into that with people. You just get covered in pee. When we take the word you out, we stop it from being a command to just being a statement of what you want. And there's nothing oppositional in that. There's nothing confrontational or aggressive or mean or rude or angry in that. It's just, I appreciate that you reserve this table. That's valid. If I don't believe that, don't say that. Say something that, I appreciate you want my table. Say something that is true for you. Don't lie just to make someone feel good. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you want this table, and I would love to be able to stay here. Is there any way another table could be used?
Hmm.
It opens up a different space. It still gets your needs voiced, but in a way that doesn't automatically put you on offense and therefore them on defense. Now, when you say this, the other person's likely not going to be like, yeah, sure. I mean, sometimes you luck out and they're like, yeah, okay, that's fine. If they come back with something, the way the boundaries blueprint works is you then repeat it a few times. So, well, but I reserve this table. I don't want to move. Yeah. And I would love to be able to stay here. Could another table be used? Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. And then you kind of do that back and forth until either the person goes away in a huff and walks off, which doesn't often happen, but sometimes can happen. In which case, conversation's over. You're at your table. Yay. No problem. What usually happens is you come to a deeper conversation, a point of negotiation, which is something I also
Hmm.
teach in the book. So, okay, I want to be able to stay here. You reserve this table. Is there any way we can come to something else? Like, for what purpose do you want this table? Well, it's near the door. It's in the corner. I like that it's tucked in, and I want to feel more private for my for my little gathering. Okay, I want to stay at this table because I don't want to move. I'm really comfortable. Can we have like a conversation about that and see if there's something that we can do? Like, hey, okay, fine, stay at the table for 20 minutes. My party doesn't start for like an hour. So you can stay for 20 minutes. After that, would it be okay to switch around? Now, in that scenario, because there was no offense defense, you're also more likely to have that conversation and meld a little bit. And now, instead of being one against the other, you've created a bridge to another person. You've problem solved together, and you've come up with something that you're both okay with. And all you had to do was use one sentence, which is three steps.
Hmm.
Oh, actually, there is one final step. I forgot the fourth magic secret step. So the fourth magic secret sauce that makes it all work is after you say the sentence, you got to be quiet and let the other person talk first. So once you say I appreciate you want this table and I would love to stay here. Can another table be used? You gotta, in your mind, like not say anything and let the other person talk first. And it can take some time. Like my mom's always a fun example because she's the extreme. 45 seconds it took for her to respond one time.
Mm.
That's unusual.
That could
Usually it's
seem
going to
like
be
an
5 to 10.
eternity.
Oh my gosh. That conversation is luckily by phone. So I hit the mute button. I was yelling at the phone. I'm like, who takes this long to respond? If you do that, make sure it's on mute. Otherwise, that's a whole other problem. What I recommend when I teach this to my clients is sing a song in your head. Keep yourself busy, because if you start to fill in that space, you're interrupting their thought process. Their brain, when you use this linguistic formula, they're ready for a fight. They're ready for you to either give in or for you to fight. They're not ready for a conversation and a bridge. And so their brain's going to break a little bit. So we need to give them a little bit of space. So how, if you imagine yourself using that kind of language in that scenario, does that feel different for you? And do you think it would have turned out better? Would you have walked away feeling better about the situation?
Well, I mean, the best I remember is my friend wasn't budging. I called her my friend. And so I just said, listen, I'll just do the polite thing and I'll just get up and move.
Right. So
And
you
she looked
you
at me
but
like I
did
was
you feel good?
crazy. She looked at me like I was crazy. She goes, you're being polite. I was like, yeah, I'll do the polite thing. I'll get up and move. Actually, I'm gonna leave. I ended up leaving. I was like about to go anyway. But I was like just kind of tired of like people. I reserved this table, so you need to move. It's just like I looked around. I mean, if there was like other people around, like I would understand. But I looked around. I was like, I literally looked. I was like, there's no one else here. It's like you walk into a cafeteria and there's like 20 seats, and then there's one person. You're like, hey, this is my seat. That's the way I
Now
saw
what would have happened if you'd gotten curious about the person and said, for what purpose do you want this specific
Oh,
Table.
I did. I remember now. And she said it's closer to this entrance.
Okay, cool.
And I was like, 15 feet makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, what you learned about that person is that for that person, it does.
Mhm.
For that person, it makes a difference. And you can either notice how different that is from what you would have done. I mean, like, well, I don't think it's that different. Or you can get curious about that person's perspective on the world. In that person's world, that 15 feet mattered enough that they spoke up. So oftentimes what happens is instead of connecting and creating this bridge to this person, we tell ourselves a whole story about it. And then we're reacting from that story, like, oh, they think they can just get away with telling me where to go and that, right? And so, which is very human.
Yeah,
It's
I
very
definitely could have
human.
handled it better, but I was just like sitting there, headphones on. I've been there for a while, like minding my own business. I'm not bothering
Yeah,
anyone. And then someone just like, it's kind of like when my wife and I go to like a sporting event or a concert. There's been times people are in our seat, and then I see there's like other seats open. I'm just like, let's just go sit there. Like, who cares? But
yeah.
that's just the way I view things.
Yeah. And I know other people who they plan their seats, especially. So I got a musical kind of background. I sing a lot. I go to musicals a lot, and a lot of my friends are super musical snobs, and they pick the very specific seats in the theater based on the physics of the science of the sound bouncing. So for them, they would 100% be like, "Get out of my seat. That's my seat."
Mhm. Did you see Wicked?
I have seen the movie and I've seen the play twice, and then I sing it constantly.
Is there any like points in the movie that like relate to what you wrote in your book about setting boundaries that resonated with you?
So I think in the movie it's a difficult and it's actually a really cool question. So I got to get the names right. Alfie, so Alphaba, so the Wicked Witch. Um, she goes off on her own. She decides to separate from all the rest of what everyone believes because she believed more in what was important to her. And she was willing to take that stance. And while that is an amazing thing to do, it did create one versus the other.
Hmm.
And so she didn't set what I would call a boundary. She set what I would call a condition or a wall. And in some cases, walls are necessary. Some cases, like if there's extreme abuse, if it's not safe physically for you to be there, then walls are necessary. And the rest of the time, boundaries are meant to keep us safe, but allow us to interact with others. And I find it interesting that Glinda, the Good Witch, actually travels around a little bubble, which is exactly what boundaries should be. She can see out, she can make her bubble bigger, smaller, she can get rid of it when she wants to, she can put it back in at will. And so in the movie, she kind of embodies what the boundaries are meant to be, just metaphorically, not obviously in her personality, because she doesn't have many boundaries. She basically is like, I'm making you over because I want to make you over. Right. And then so she embodies the lack of boundaries and the wanting to fit in at all costs to the point of not necessarily knowing herself. Whereas Alphaba is the walls, the conditions that you can't tell me who I am or what I am. And we glorify that because it's a good thing to know who you are and what makes you different. But we're not meant to then keep ourselves at odds. Even the posters for Wicked are one versus the other. It takes these friends and puts them at odds. Versus if they had used different language patterns and talked to each other and maybe had conversations, found some common ground, as unlikely as it might have seemed. And in the friendship, they did do that. But on the grander scheme of things, they had to go one against the other. So I would say that there's a lot of metaphors. I mean, that whole the whole story of it is all metaphorical. But I think there's a lot of them that actually relate to boundaries and how to create a space to connect with others without losing yourself, because it's that's the goal, that's the point.
To not lose yourself, be true to
Yeah,
yourself, you're saying.
be true to myself and then blend my trueness with others. So there's something I talk about in the book is the stages of development and learning. It was outlined by a guy named Noel Burke in, I think, the 70s, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. And it says that every time we learn something like a task or a new activity, as well as in our growth overall as from children to adult, We go through four different stages of learning and development. The first stage is the unconscious incompetence. It's what I don't know what I don't know. When we're first born, we don't know we don't know. We don't know anything, so we don't even know what we don't know yet. We're completely dependent on other people to tell us because we don't know. We don't even know what questions to ask. And when we first start, think about if you got like a new job. You arrive on the first day, you don't even know what you don't know. You're completely dependent. You don't know how to get paid. You don't even know where to lunch, to where the bathroom is. So you're completely dependent on someone. The next stage of learning, we get to conscious incompetence. This is where I now know what I don't know. In our development through childhood, this is where we're in like the quote unquote terrible twos. This is where we now know what we don't know, but we're trying it anyways. Now, this is how we're learning and figuring stuff out. At the job, this is where we're now shadowing the other person. This is codependency. This is where I don't know how to do it on my own. I need you to do it with me. This is the age when kids are like, I want to help. The next stage, once we now move through, we get new tools and new resources. We get to conscious competence. This is where I know what I need to do. I know how to do it. And I don't need your help anymore. In our development, we call this independence. This is where I'm doing the job and I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. We think that's the end goal, that's all we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get to independence, know who we are, and then that's it. But there's actually a fourth step, and it's called conscious competence. Uh, Change that. Unconscious competence.
Mm-hmm.
It's where it's just our new normal. It's just what we do. In terms of our development, that's called interdependence. Interdependence is where we take the identity that we learned in independence and we now merge it with the greater society so we can elevate each other. We unfortunately, without boundaries, will create codependency. We'll go a step backwards. So
Mm.
boundaries is what allows us to hold our the uniqueness that we learn in the independent stage so that we can then blend with others to create something different. So oftentimes we get codependent and interdependent mixed up, but the only difference between codependent and interdependent is the boundaries that I'm supposed to learn when I'm independent, but we don't know there's another step. So we stay in independence, like, I don't need anybody. Great. That's what you're supposed to learn in independence. And then interdependence is I don't need anybody. I'm choosing to connect with another person because I know that when I do, it might be messier sometimes, but it means that I can grow more and I can assist you and we can elevate each other. And so this is why I'm so passionate about boundaries because it's what allows us to know who we are and maintain our sense of self while blending with others and not losing ourselves like we would in codependency.
So what you're saying
Long
is
answer.
like codependency is like I know how to do a job. However, I'm gonna get someone to help me so I can do my job better. How, so being like open to like wanting help, but even though you don't need the help because you're independent.
That's interdependence. Codependency,
Interdependency. Okay.
yeah, codependence is I don't know that I can do it on my own. So codependent technically means when it takes two people to do one job. So in a
To the
job
tango.
training,
Got it.
two to tango, right? So I don't know how to manage my own emotions. I need you to soothe me and calm me down. That's now two people managing one person's emotions. That's codependency.
Mm.
In codependency, and I talk about it in the book in terms of circles. So if you imagine that you have a circle, and that circle is all of who you are, all your beliefs, all your thoughts, all your opinions, everything of who you are. And other people have their circles. In codependency, the circles overlap so much that there's barely any space left for just independent thought. In independence, the circles don't touch each other at all. They're completely separate. So they know who they are, but they're a little lonely and they always feel left out. They feel like they never quite belong.
So like codependency is like diminishing returns. Like it's taking two people to do one thing.
The second part you said, I understood diminishing returns. I'm like, that's
So like
financial talk. My
so
brain just broke.
it's like too many it's like too many cooks in the kitchen.
Kind of, yeah. It's
It's like,
codependency is
hey,
when
like the kitchen works optimally with three, and then they add a fourth, and then they actually like do worse with the fourth.
yeah, because it's too many people and it's you don't need two people to manage one person's stuff. But in codependency, both people don't know that. So in a codependent relationship, for example, this is the one you see all the time on the Hallmark Channel. You know, you complete me. I'm not whole without you. You're my missing piece. Yeah, that's codependent. That's saying that I'm somehow not whole without something else.
Hmm.
And so codependency means that I'm not whole without this extra person in the kitchen. Interdependence is saying that I don't need anyone in the kitchen. So independence is I'm going to do it all myself, everyone out of my kitchen. Interdependence is I know that we work better as a team. You're going to be on the grill, you're going to be on plating. We have just the number of people to get it done. High five us, and we're going to all blend together. And if in your task you realize, hey, it's more efficient if I do this, I'm going to trust that you're adding something new to the dimension in the conversation that I probably wouldn't have known on my own. We're now blending what we know together to create something greater than what could have been created independently. And that's only possible with boundaries, because without boundaries, we just give in and we are nice and we do what people want. And then we get angry and then we get passive aggressive and then we create conflict and it gets messy. So boundaries is what allows us to do that. But most of us don't set boundaries. We set conditions. We say things like, excuse me, you can't talk to me like that. They can though. They probably did. That's probably why you're upset about it.
Hmm.
So you can't control someone else. You can't control someone else's thoughts or make them do or believe anything. And right now we're caught in these conversations where we're trying to prove to the other person why they're wrong and we're right. And it's dividing us.
Hmm.
Interdependence is knowing how to hold my truth and hold my beliefs and still get curious about yours and being open to influence. Like, I never thought of it that way before. Thank you. We're also afraid of losing our beliefs by blending with others because we're coming from codependence without boundaries. And so, boundaries is the missing link that allows us to blend with others so that we can feel like we belong, so we can all work together, but not in a way that makes us lose who we are. And I teach people how to do that in a single sentence without feeling like a jerk.
Yeah, that somewhat reminded me of the book I'm reading, The Power, is it The Power of Now?
There is a book called The Power of Now. Not sure if that's
Was
the
it
one
by
you're reading.
is it by Eckhart or someone? But basically
Yeah, I
it's
think
like,
Eckhart Tolle wrote that. Yeah.
yeah, and he like talks about how like when you like argue with someone, how it like does certain things versus just like being in the moment, realizing it's a difficult situation and just like staying in it. Like
Yeah.
time almost slows down when you do that. It's like being in the Matrix, like you start like seeing stuff and like you see dust particles. Your book also reminds me a little bit about your book would be considered what, personal development?
Personal development, self-help, relationship, because if you're having issues in a relationship, regardless of the relationship, 9 times out of 10, boundaries are going to make a huge difference if you do it better.
Yeah, I'm getting like correlation with the never split the difference guy.
Yes, I have. So I know that concept. I know what you're talking about. I don't think I've ever read the
However,
book.
yours is more for like everyday life versus he's like an FBI negotiator. Like the big
Yes,
thing he talked about was like, you talked about words earlier. Like in the book, he talks about like why is an offensive word.
yes, I have a whole section on how to avoid why. When negotiating with others, oftentimes we'll say to someone, "No, why do you believe that?" Or in your example, "Why do you want this table?" The word why automatically puts someone on defense.
Hmm.
While even if we have the best intentions and we're legit just asking out of curiosity's sake, linguistically, the word why makes people think that you are questioning the validity and they think they have to justify what's going on. Even if that doesn't happen, you're not going to really get any useful information. We don't know why we do anything. We run mostly on autopilot 9 times out of 10. If we all knew why we did things, none of us would have like eating concerns or like weight concerns. We'd all do everything. So asking someone why, even if it doesn't cause conflict, is going to give you irrelevant data. So I talk all about how to negotiate using different linguistics. And to me, that's the difference. We all
Hmm.
know, we've all been talking about like that book, Don't Split the Difference. It's been around for a long time, and The Power of Now has been around for a long time. So we all have been talking about the concepts of it. We're all like, yes, we need to be in the present moments and we need to do this. How? And part of the reason why I wrote this book is that in my private practice, working with clients, no matter who I was working with, what their reason for coming in, eventually it always came down to boundaries. And everyone's like, I know I need this, but I don't know how to do this in a way that feels good for me and doesn't tick off the other person or create drama.
Hmm.
And it turns out specific language patterns, linguistics, like this really just that is we think language like I have to be nicer, like I have to say I'm so sorry you feel that way, even though we don't, we're not. We're kind of happy, right? So we lie, we think that we need to use our words to appease others. I'm saying we can use specific linguistic patterns just by changing different words, that in and of itself, without doing anything else, even if you feel utterly gross and terrified inside, the words create the bridge.
Totally. And it's the same thing in all worlds, personal, business, like
Mm-hmm.
certain words just trigger people.
Yeah.
Like instead of saying but, say and,
Mm-hmm.
or instead of saying like sign, say authorize, or instead of saying contract, say agreement. Just changing your verbiage can make the whole same conversation totally different.
100%, 100%. What I talk about a lot in so in my book, but I also run an 8-day life mastery training program where I bring all the concepts in the book to life and then like add all sorts of coolness to it. We talk about how, from a neurological perspective, what we're able to pay attention to in our environment is teeny, teeny, tiny, 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 based on all the data that's out there. The estimates are the Encyclopedia Britannica puts it at 11 billion bits of information coming at us every second, and our brain's capable of dealing with about 50 at a time.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like if you've ever gone to, so I've never been to Times Square in New York City, but I've seen it a million times on TV. We have a little kind of replica in Toronto called Dundas Square, but you know how they have those huge, huge, huge TV screens and it has like whatever ads and pictures and stuff on it. And it's made up of all these little pixels. And if you've ever seen them when they break, you'll have like missing squares out of the picture. Imagine that there's a big screen and it's got 11 billion pixels and you're getting 50 of them and you have to now figure out what the picture is. And so we can't. And so our brains fill in the gaps and do its best guess based on what we've experienced in the past, based on what we believe, based on our worldview, based on what we've been taught. We kind of fill in the picture and everyone will see and experience something different. What's interesting is our words can actually change what lights up. The language that we use is one of the filters that all that information goes through that takes it from 11 billion down to 50. So when we change our words, we literally change our experience of reality because it allows different stuff to get through the filters. We get to see different pixels.
Hmm.
And if we're lucky, we can use our words to get a cluster of pixels and get like a chunk of information right in the middle of the picture and then know more of what's going on versus 50 random ones. And you're like, it's all the corners. I don't know. So words help you find things better in reality and literally create what you perceive in the world.
Is it the same thing like when they show those pictures where they're like whatever you see first, like some people see a cup and some people see like an old woman, like in the same picture? Is that like the same sort of thing?
So that's optical illusions. I think that's based on somewhat on Gestalt psychology and the idea that our brains are wired for patterns.
Hmm.
That's why it takes us multiple times to learn to experience something before we learn it. I also talk about that in the book in terms of when we're moving through those 4 stages of learning. It takes repetition for our brain to get what's happening. So we need to be exposed to information multiple times before it starts to make it through because we're pattern recognizing machines. So the first time something happens, our brain's like, what off? I don't have to pay attention to that. The second time it happens, it's like maybe a pattern. Third time it happens, now our brain's paying attention. Now we get different pixels lighting up in that picture because different information is becoming available. So the optical illusion, the old man and the young woman one, where it's like the feather and then the neckline, those are optical illusions, and that's brilliant artists. I can't remember the artist who did that one. I used to at one point know that. Um, that and calculus left my brain a long time ago. But that's actually artists playing with the knowledge that our brains recognize pictures or
Hmm.
patterns. So they use it to create art, which I think is neat.
So when someone has a lot of bad things happen to them, how do you get them to view that like bad things don't always happen? Because we're patterned recognizing, oh, bad things always happen to me, and this is never gonna end because it's like, oh, this keeps happening, it keeps happening, it keeps happening.
So, how do I do it versus how do most people do it? So, most people think that they have to use their words to try to convince themselves consciously. Like, I'm going to put affirmations on my mirror in the morning and I'm going to tell myself the world is good things can happen. The world is good things can happen. And that is 100% effective. And it takes a long time because for a short amount of time, neurologically, you're lying to yourself. And so the information is not getting in right away because you're going to say good things are going to happen, and your unconscious, the deep part of you that's out of your awareness, is like, that's not true. I don't believe that. And so it kind of bounces out of your neurology, and over time you can program it, just because the more we change our words, the more we change our physiology and we change the biochemicals in our body. So over time that works. How I do it, I am a trained master hypnotherapist, and I use Ericksonian hypnosis to get the conscious mind out of the way so we can change the filters deep down in the unconscious, and then it happens more readily. So I have protocols specifically for trauma that I I found all this information based on my own history and the trauma I went through. I was diagnosed with 7 mental health diagnoses when I was 19 years old. I was, in the words of some of my doctors, broken. And so I went through all that. And in my journey, I tried everything. I was in therapy for 13 years. I have a degree in psychology. I went to study psychology to see if I can figure out what was going on in my own brain. I read all the books. I did all the exercises. I did everything I was supposed to do. I had the affirmations, and my brain understood what was happening, but I didn't believe it and feel it in my heart. And I used to say that to my psychologist. I'm like, I get what you're saying. I have the same stupid degrees. I know what you're saying, but I don't believe it. And they followed the model of just keep repeating it until you believe it. And I repeated it for years and years and years, and it didn't work. It made me function, but it brought up other anxieties.
Hmm.
The style that I use, using conversational hypnosis, which is basically saying I use very specific language patterns when I communicate with others, that allows me to override the parts of the mind that get in the way and create deep shifts deep down without you having to relive the experience. And I didn't believe in this stuff when I found my own coach 12 years ago now, I think. I just celebrated my recovery anniversary. I can't remember how long ago it was now, which is kind of fun that I've lost track of the number of it. And so I have never seen any tools work as well as these. I'm highly biased. It's why I use them in my private practice. It's what I teach in my life mastery program. So if you want to learn all about it, come hang out with me for 8 days. But it's how to use very specific linguistics to unlock in someone else beliefs that are currently being closed down by trauma, and it requires them never having to talk about the trauma again. And I can do it in the trauma protocol itself. Well, I have one specifically for phobias. I can get rid of a phobia in 15 minutes if I talk slow, 10 on average. And
Hmm.
I've seen some incredible results in others, and I experienced it myself. It's why I ended up getting. I used to work in animal health. I have a background in marketing. I didn't intend to coach or write books or anything like that. It's just that I turned my life around after being told I had a 12% chance statistically of ever living medication free or recovering. And yet here I am, medication free and recovered. And so I'm like, well, why is no one talking about that stuff? And so that led me to my private practice, that led me to running retreats, that led me to my 8 day program, and now it led me to writing a book to start to get this information into people's hands. Because I think we've gotten to a place in society where we all know we have trauma. Woo, it's all trauma. We're all like, yay, I'm traumatized. Well, my trauma is different than yours. I'm more special in my trauma. And so that's good that we all are recognizing what trauma is. And I think it's time to start to turn the conversation not to ignoring the trauma in order to find healing, not in repeating affirmations to pretend the trauma wasn't there, but in changing the language we use and unraveling it more deeply.
Yeah, this is something I I think I wrote something similar in our annual letter about investing, and I haven't sent it to our supporters yet. However, I wrote that like everyone wants to get to the good times, but in order to know what the good times are, you have to go through bad times. You can't, they're not, and I think this is in the Power of Now book. I'm listening to it again. But it's like, hey, in order to know what good times are, you have to go through bad times. In order to get to the good times, you have to go through bad times. They're not excluded. It's not all just good times. It's not all just bad times. So realizing like you have to, if you're going through something bad, you have to get through it to get to the good times. And sometimes you go through good times and you have a setback. That's just the way the world works. There's not a continuous flow of just bliss and happiness. That's just not the way life is.
Right? It's our language that dichotomizes it and puts it into good and bad, right? But that's our own construct. It's just life. It's just natural flow. Systems come together, they pull apart. We see this in, the microscopic and the macro level in the universe. We see how things naturally follow that flow, but our minds think that the future that we want should happen because I want it and I'm thinking about it. And so I've hallucinated what the future is in my head, but it doesn't actually exist. It's a full hallucination. It's what I want, it's what I hope. It's a great predict, it's a good guess based, so I can predict and get a pretty good guess that tomorrow I will wake up and everything will be wonderful and I'll have my normal morning routine. If that doesn't happen, that's not because something went wrong. What happened was life just existed and I guessed wrong. Right? And so I think, again, our language is what makes it a good time or a bad time. But objectively speaking, it's just life is unfolding and some things feel horrible and some things feel great. But that's all part of what was meant to be as part of life. That it's always supposed to be good was our hallucination and our hope, but it doesn't actually exist. It's just a hallucination. It's us making up a picture based on some pixels and hoping that, oh, I hope these pixels are Taylor Swift. And then it's like, oh, it's not. It's like something else. You're like, oh,
Ends up being
disappointed.
Fabio.
Right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, that's not what I wanted to see. But that was always the picture. The fact that I thought it was Taylor Swift because I wanted it to be and I was hoping doesn't change the fact that it's always been that. And I just didn't see enough of it yet. So I think, again, our language can help shift it and not using language to appease ourselves or lie to ourselves and tell ourselves, I'm worthy when I don't feel it, but to use our language to unravel the traumas without having to relive the traumas so that we can feel worthy. Like I said, and that's kind of what I do in my private practice. That's what I do in my 8-day life mastery training. I don't bring that stuff to the book because that's that would be a much thicker book. That would be very different. So in the book, I talk about how to start to rewrite the story that you've been telling yourself through the lens of boundaries, through the lens of relationship, through the lens of how people are mirroring back to you aspects of yourself that you can't see, which is called projection. And I actually have a whole chart on how to turn the people who are triggering you in your life into guides on what your next steps are, just using language. Called the trigger neutralizer. Right? Yeah, choo choo choo.
Yeah,
Where when you broadcast this lady, you need to put in one of those little sound effects.
I'll see if we can do that. So maybe that's a next book you come out with, so that way it's not as thick.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, actually, the next book I'm working on, once we know who we are and how to blend with others, then the questions become, well, what is beyond other? And so, how to create a spiritual practice. So, how to be spiritual. So, the working title is How to Be Spiritual Without Being Weird About It.
Mm, yeah. I remember everyone in California is like, oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. What what was the comedian? I think the comedian was like Daniel Tosh. He like had a joke about that. He was like, everyone, all these people in California, like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. He's like, I'm not honest, but you're really interesting, or something like that. Something along those lines. So,
Yeah, basically it means that I believe in what the religions teach, but I don't believe in how they go about practicing it. So I'm going to make up my own practice to honor what you guys are talking about. That's really it. We're all talking about the same stuff. It's just we all have different ways of doing it. And then again, we get into contests like my way is better than your way versus learning from each other, going in interdependence, how to take my faith and my beliefs and merge it together without losing who I am. And boundaries. And so I'm hoping that as people are willing to learn this and not just know what boundaries are and that they're important, but how to do it. And once you play with the formula, it seems so simple. Like it's so I'm just going to say the sentence and it's going to make a difference. Yeah. Um, Give it a go, even if just to prove me wrong. But I'll tell you, I've seen the example I use in my book. Sorry, my arm's itchy and I want to hit my microphone. The example I gave in the book is I had a client who had a decades long feud with her father.
Hmm.
Like, just they did not see eye to eye on literally everything. Politics was the smallest part of it, believe it or not, and it was big. And one day, life happened, and so my client ended up having to move back home temporarily. So now sharing an environment with said father, and got into some big argument. And we'd been doing some work together. And instead of the usual, well, why can't you, and back and forth, my client said, I appreciate that you don't, believe in what I believe, and I would love to feel supported by my father. And then stayed silent. And of course, the father's like, I support you and I'm letting you live here, like all the things. And then my clients, after her father had gotten quiet, my client said, yeah, and I would love to feel supported by my father. And then again, father like, all the things screaming. And my client told me that actually they were I think they were singing a song from Wicked in their head. I wrote it in the book. Now I'm trying to remember. Now I think I might just have Wicked in my brain, but I think that they said that during that silence they were singing a song from Wicked, and I'm like, oh, perfect. So did this like 2 or 3 times, and then finally my client said, no, I would love to feel supported by my father, and her father just yelled out, I don't know how to support you, and both of them just stopped.
Hmm.
Like, that was such a profound moment. And they ended up having a conversation where my client shared what they needed to feel supported, and the father shared what they were comfortable with. They weren't talking about the politics, they weren't talking about their disagreements, they were talking about a child and a father and how to support each other. And my client says that one conversation turned the entire relationship around. So truly, this formula, I used to, with my clients, call it the magic formula. I rebranded it to the boundaries blueprint because it sounds cuter, but it's more marketable sounding. But there is so much magic when you use the words not to appease, but to open up a space to connect. And we're just not taught this. We're taught how to read and write. We're taught how to talk. We're not taught how to communicate and connect and get curious about another without losing ourselves. That's a big part of what this book is, and that's a big part of what my 8-day life mastery training is.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a child that asks a lot of questions and like the parent gets upset versus they're just like curious. And I think a lot of people lose that curiosity where if someone says something they don't disagree with, it's like, well, tell me more. Like, what makes you think that? Or, and you don't even
Yeah.
have to like say anything. It's just like they'll talk the whole time and you just listen, which, in my opinion, listening is much easier than talking. Talking is exhausting for me. I don't know about you.
No, I can talk. I yap a lot. I can talk a lot, but it's funny because you don't like to talk. I guess that's why you like to host the podcast. It's like I just ask the questions
I
and
like
let
being
them
on
go.
podcasts too. It's just you know, you go on some podcasts. It's just like the person has like an agenda. They got like questions they want to ask. They want to like make the show all about them. It's just like let's just have a conversation, and talk, and see where it goes.
Yeah, I love that. That's my favorite kind, and more and more people are starting to do that, which is nice. Let's just two people communicate. Let's just connect and let's build bridges to each other.
Yeah. Well, let's build a bridge. I'm gonna get a copy of the book. I told my
Ah,
wife about it, and she's like, "I need that." I'm like, "All right, I need to get you. I need you to get the book." So I'm gonna go buy it soon. It's on Amazon, right?
it is. It's available on Amazon. It will soon be available on barnesandnoble.com and more globally. I'm just working on that's a whole other system apparently that you have to deal with. So I'm working on that, but right now it's available on Amazon worldwide. And once you get the book, if you go to my website, which is btgwellness.com, BTG stands for Bridge the Gap because I help people bridge the gap between their head and their heart. So btgwellness.com/book, and you can download, there's a guided meditation, and there is a workbook that you can use to go through the different activities in the chapters. So there's little free giveaways on my website for anyone who wants them as well once you get the book. You just need your receipt number plugged in.
Would it be possible to get a signed copy from you?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, I'm
Yeah.
gonna buy it, and I want a signed copy.
Yes, absolutely. Give me an email with your address and I'll get one out to you. Now, I will tell you that Canada just got off of a postal worker strike.
Oh,
Yeah, it
Current event that we don't know
current
about.
event. Yes. So all so Canada Post, all mail in Canada has been knocked out for weeks. It just started up, I think, yesterday or the day before. So there's a bit of a backlog. So I will put it in the mail and you will get it whenever God's team. But I did get a package in yesterday, so some things are making it through. So I will send it, and yeah, I'd love to give you a signed copy.
Okay. I'll still buy one off Amazon so that way they let me review it.
Oh yes, yes, that would be wonderful. I'd love that. And if anyone's listening to read the book, please put reviews. It's like
Yeah.
currency for
Build a
authors.
bridge, help out, check it out.
Yeah, yeah.
So cool. Jen, it was fun.
Yeah, awesome. Always great to chat with you.
All right, awesome. We'll see everyone next time. Bye.